The morning started like any other for the crew preparing Flight 327. But from the moment the cabin staff stepped through the jet bridge, something in the atmosphere felt slightly different. It wasn't anything dramatic or obvious, just a quiet tension, a sense that the day might hold a few surprises. The airport outside buzzed with its usual noise, people rolling suitcases, announcements echoing through the halls, and families gathering for long-awaited trips. But inside the aircraft, as the crew moved through their usual routine, there was an unspoken alertness among them. One of the first to notice this shift was Elena Cruz, a senior flight attendant who had been in the industry long enough to recognize when something didn't feel quite right. She pushed her hair behind her ear, gave a polite nod to the ground staff outside the door, and walked into the cabin with a practiced smile. Her feet moved automatically, but her eyes scanned the space like she always did, checking the seats, the overhead bins, the emergency equipment to make sure nothing was out of place. Everything looked normal, yet she could sense a quiet buzz among the newer attendants. They exchanged quick glances, whispered in low voices, and acted as though they were preparing for something she hadn't been told yet. She approached one of them, a younger attendant named Leela, who was usually cheerful and chatty, but seemed oddly focused today. "Everything all right?" Elena asked in a gentle tone. Leela hesitated, then leaned closer. "I think someone important is flying with us today." "Someone really high profile?" Elena raised an eyebrow. It wasn't unusual for famous people to be on flights: politicians, actors, championship coaches, business leaders. But the way Lila said it made her pause. "Do you know who?" Elena asked. "I heard the ground team talking," Lila replied quietly. "They said his security team arrived very early. I don't know the details, but apparently the airline requested extra protocols." Elena nodded slowly. She wasn't the type to get excited over celebrity passengers, but she understood the extra attention the airline sometimes gave them. Still, she felt something in her chest tighten, a subtle instinct telling her this flight might be different. She walked toward the front of the cabin, reviewing her safety checklist, but part of her mind kept drifting. She had worked through enough unexpected situations, medical emergencies, passengers who panicked, minor mechanical delays, to know that anything could happen. Even a completely normal flight could turn stressful in a matter of seconds. As boarding time approached, the jet bridge connected with a soft thump, shaking the aircraft just slightly. The flight crew took their positions. Elena straightened her uniform and gave herself a small moment to breathe. Routine or not, once passengers started walking in, everything needed to run smoothly. The first wave of passengers arrived like they always did: business travelers juggling briefcases, parents guiding children, elderly passengers taking careful steps while holding their boarding passes close to their chests. Elena greeted each one with kindness, offering help to anyone who seemed unsure or tired. But the energy shifted when a group of airport staff appeared at the entrance. They moved with a certain stiffness, stepping aside in a coordinated way. Behind them walked a man in his late 40s with thick glasses and neatly styled hair. He kept his head slightly lowered as he stepped onto the plane. Two assistants followed close behind him, one carrying a laptop bag and the other holding a tablet with flight details pulled up. Even without being told, Elena knew immediately who he was. She had seen his face on the covers of magazines at airport shops, displayed on giant screens advertising new technology, and in countless documentaries about modern innovators. He wasn't an actor or a singer. He was one of the biggest names in the tech world, someone known for reshaping entire industries with ideas others couldn't imagine. But today, he didn't look like the confident figure she recognized from interviews. His shoulders were tense, his movements sharp, and he kept glancing behind him as if expecting someone to appear. When he reached his seat in first class, he sat down quickly, almost collapsing into it. His assistants exchanged tight, worried looks but said nothing. Elena kept her expression calm. She walked up to him with the same polite tone she used with every passenger. "Welcome aboard," she said. He nodded slightly, but his eyes flicked past her, scanning the cabin as if searching for something hidden. Elena stepped back. She wasn't here to judge or pry. Still, something about his behavior stayed in her mind. She tried brushing it away. Maybe he was just stressed, or maybe something important was happening in his company. People at his level carried enormous pressure. The rest of the passengers continued boarding. A family with 2 children took their seats in the economy section, the kids excitedly pointing out the window. A couple entered quietly, speaking softly about their vacation plans. A student walked through the aisle wearing headphones. Absorbed in her music, everything looked normal. But then, as boarding neared its end, one of the flight attendants walked quickly toward Alina. Looking uneasy, "I'm not sure if I should say something," she whispered. But one of the passengers in the terminal mentioned the man in first class was acting strange before he got on. He looked anxious, like he was talking to himself or arguing with someone. Alina's heart gave a small, uncomfortable thump. She didn't jump to conclusions easily, but she had been trained to notice unusual behavior, especially when safety was involved. "Did they say anything else?" Alina asked. "No, just that he didn't seem like himself." Alina took a slow breath. It wasn't enough to sound an alarm, and there were strict rules about protecting the privacy of high-profile passengers. Overreacting could cause unnecessary panic, something she never wanted. Still, ignoring a concern completely wasn't an option either. She approached the captain, who was reviewing final flight details in the cockpit. "Captain," she said softly, "I just wanted to make you aware that our passenger in first class seems unsettled. Nothing serious yet, but enough that I think we should keep an eye on things." The captain listened carefully. He didn't interrupt, didn't make a joke, didn't brush it off. That was one thing Alina respected deeply about him. He took every safety concern seriously, no matter how small. "Thank you for letting me know," he said. "We'll stay alert. Just observe for now. If anything escalates, notify me immediately." Lena nodded and stepped out of the cockpit, feeling a bit more grounded. At least the captain was aware. As she walked down the aisle again, she glanced discreetly toward the man in first class. He was leaning forward now, elbows on his knees, fingers pressed against his forehead. His assistants whispered to him, trying to calm him, but he shook his head sharply. His breathing looked uneven. Something wasn't right, but passengers kept boarding. Unaware of the tension forming at the front of the aircraft, the final boarding call echoed faintly from the jet bridge. A few more people hurried in, apologizing for being late. The attendants closed overhead bins, checked seatbelts, and guided passengers to settle in quickly. When the cabin door finally closed, a hush fell over the space. That moment always felt like a shift. The world outside was now separated, and whatever happened next belonged entirely to those inside the plane. Alina walked through the aisles one last time, offering reassuring smiles, adjusting a seatbelt for an older passenger, and helping a young traveler stow her backpack properly. But even as she focused on her tasks, her mind kept drifting back to the man in first class. She had no idea what was coming next. No one did. For now, all she could do was trust her instincts, stay alert, and hope the flight continued as smoothly as it had begun. The moment the cabin doors locked, the inside of the aircraft felt like its own small world, sealed away from the airport noise. The busy terminal, and whatever rush each passenger had been carrying with them. The engines hummed softly as the plane prepared to push back from the gate, and the cabin lights dimmed just enough to create a calm atmosphere. Alina walked slowly toward the front, checking seatbelts and offering warm smiles. But even as she moved with confidence, she couldn't shake the sharp pull of worry sitting in her chest. She tried to focus on routine tasks, but her mind kept drifting back to the man in first class. He sat stiffly in his seat, hands clasped tightly together. His assistants whispered to him in low voices, trying to keep things discreet, but the tension around them was impossible to miss. Passengers sitting nearby glanced over curiously, trying not to stare, but clearly sensing something unusual. Alina paused a few seats away, pretending to check an overhead bin while she discreetly observed. His breathing seemed uneven, too fast, too shallow. His knee bounced constantly, as if he couldn't keep still. The assistants looked tired, worried, and unsure of what to do. She stepped closer. "Is everything all right?" she asked gently, directing the question to the assistant so she wouldn't embarrass him. One of them nodded quickly, though it was obvious the reassurance wasn't entirely honest. "He's just had a long week," the assistant said softly. "A lot of pressure. He'll be okay." Alina gave a polite smile, but she didn't fully believe it. She had seen stressed passengers before, business travelers exhausted after days of meetings, parents overwhelmed with tired children, students anxious about long flights. But this felt different. This wasn't simple exhaustion. Still, she reminded herself to stay calm. People coped with stress in many ways. Not every uneasy passenger posed a problem. As she stepped back, the aircraft slowly began to pull away from the gate. The slight movement caused a few passengers to grip their armrests. A toddler in the middle, Rose, giggled at the feeling, bouncing excitedly in her seat. While her mother tried to keep her still, Alina walked through the aisle again to help anyone who seemed nervous or confused. An older man near the back asked how long the flight would be, and she answered kindly, easing his worry. A young couple whispered excitedly about their vacation, and she offered them a reassuring smile. Most passengers were relaxed. Most were looking forward to their destinations. Most had no idea what was quietly unfolding just a few feet away. When Alina returned to the front, she noticed the man in first class running a hand through his hair over and over, as though trying to calm himself. His eyes kept darting around the cabin, moving from the windows to the aisle to the ceiling. He looked like someone expecting something to happen, something only he understood. The plane continued taxiing, rolling slowly along the smooth path that led toward the runway. The cabin lights dimmed another level, signaling that takeoff was approaching. Then it happened. The man suddenly sat up straight, as if struck by a jolt of electricity. His eyes widened. His chest rose sharply with a deep, panicked breath. "No, this isn't right," he whispered, but loud enough for the assistants to hear. One of them leaned forward. "Everything is fine," he said quietly. "Just take a slow breath. We're almost in the air." But the man didn't hear him, or maybe he couldn't. His hand reached out and gripped the armrest until his knuckles turned pale. He leaned closer to his assistant, voice trembling. "It's here," he said. "I know it is. Someone put it on this plane. I can feel it." The assistant's face went pale. "There is nothing here. We checked. Please relax." But the man shook his head firmly, sweat forming along his forehead. Alina froze for a moment, feeling her heart skip. She stepped forward, her voice steady, despite the sudden rush of fear. "Sir," she said softly, "you're safe here. If you need anything, I'm here to help." He looked at her, but his eyes were unfocused, like he was seeing something she couldn't. Then he spoke again, louder this time. "You need to stop the plane," he said. Now the assistant tried to calm him, but the man pushed his hands away. His voice rose, filled with fear instead of anger. "Stop the plane," he demanded. Passengers sitting nearby turned toward the commotion. A couple exchanged worried looks. A man across the aisle frowned, trying to understand what was happening. Even those farther back could sense the sudden tension. Alina felt the shift. Instantly, the fragile change in the air when panic begins to spread. She lifted her hand slightly, signaling to another attendant to stay close. Her training kicked in, grounding her even as her pulse sped up. "Sir," she said firmly but kindly, "please stay seated. We're moving right now, so it's important to remain calm. Can you tell me what's worrying you?" He shook his head again, faster this time. "It's meant for me," he whispered. "Someone put something here. A device. I know it. You have to stop the plane." Alina felt a chill crawl up her spine, not because she believed there was a device, but because his fear was so intense, so real to him, that he truly believed it. The assistants exchanged helpless glances. One of them leaned in toward Alina and whispered, "He hasn't slept in days. He's been under so much pressure. He's convinced someone is after him. It's been getting worse." Worse. That word echoed inside her head. She knew she had to act carefully. Anything she said or did needed to keep him calm, not escalate the situation. But she also had to ensure the safety of everyone on board. "Please stay with him," she told the assistants quietly. "I'll inform the captain." She steadied her breathing and walked quickly toward the cockpit. Her hands were cold, but her steps were sure. When she reached the door, she pressed the intercom button. "Captain," she said quietly, "we have a situation." The captain's calm voice responded, "What's going on?" She explained everything, how the passenger insisted the plane had a dangerous device, how he was panicking, how the situation was escalating quickly. There was a brief pause, but she knew the captain was processing fast. He always did. "All right," he said, steady as ever. "We're stopping the aircraft right now. Keep everyone seated and stay as calm as possible." "I'm notifying air traffic control." Lena closed the intercom and turned back toward the cabin. The plane began to slow, the engines humming deeper as it came to a halt on the taxiway. A few passengers looked around in confusion, whispering to each other, sensing something unusual was happening. She moved toward the front again. The man in first class now sat rigidly, his chest rising and falling in rapid breaths. His hands shook visibly. "It's all right," Alina said softly, kneeling beside his seat. "The captain has paused the plane. Everything is under control. No one is in danger." But the man didn't calm. His eyes were filled with fear so real it made Elena's heart ache. "I'm telling you," he said, his voice cracking. "Someone wants to hurt me. Why won't anyone listen?" His assistant placed a hand on his shoulder, speaking softly but firmly. "There is no one after you. You're safe. Please try to breathe with me." The man shook off the hand again and leaned back, gripping the edge of his seat. His breathing became uneven. It was clear he was fighting some invisible threat that existed only in his mind. Passengers nearby leaned away slightly, unsure of what was happening, but sensing the seriousness of it, Alina remained calm. "Sir, the plane isn't moving. You're safe. Nothing will happen to you here. I promise." He swallowed hard, but his fear didn't fade. Minutes passed like hours as the plane remained still on the taxiway. The captain informed the airport authorities, and they instructed security teams to approach. Out the window, ground vehicles slowly moved toward the plane, still at a distance. Inside, tension thickened. Passengers began asking questions. "Why have we stopped? Is something wrong? Are we taking off soon?" Alina and the other attendants reassured them with practiced calm, explaining only that there was a situation being handled and that the crew was making sure everyone stayed safe. But even as she spoke, Alina felt a growing ache in her stomach. She didn't fear danger. She feared for the man whose mind had turned against him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't violent. He was terrified, and his fear had brought an entire plane to a stop. He sat with his hands shaking, his gaze unfocused, his chest rising and falling too fast. His assistants tried their best to comfort him, but the weight of his thoughts was too heavy. Alina stayed close, speaking gently when needed, offering reassurance even as she monitored every detail around her. Outside, the security team approached slowly, prepared for anything. Inside, the passengers waited anxiously, unaware of the full truth, and at the center of it all, the man who had once been seen as unshakable sat struggling against fears only he could see. The flight had not even left the ground, but already everything had changed. The plane remained still on the taxiway, its engines humming softly like a giant machine holding its breath. Inside, the atmosphere felt strangely heavy. No one knew exactly what was happening, but everyone could feel that something wasn't right. Small whispers rolled through the cabin as passengers exchanged confused looks. Trying to understand why their flight had stopped so suddenly, Alina stood near the front of the cabin, doing her best to keep her voice calm as she reassured people who were growing uneasy. She had handled emergencies before, but this one felt different. It wasn't a medical issue or a technical problem. It was one man's fear so real to him that it had changed the course of the entire flight. The passenger in first class sat rigidly in his seat, breathing unevenly. His hands trembled, gripping the armrests as if he were holding on to something solid in a world that suddenly felt unstable. His two assistants hovered beside him, whispering comforting words he barely seemed to hear. Outside the windows, airport security vehicles edged closer, moving slowly and carefully, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any moment. Inside the plane, the lights remained dim, giving the cabin a strangely quiet glow. A voice from a few rows back whispered, "Is everything okay?" Another passenger answered, "I don't know, but something's wrong." Alina took a slow breath and walked toward the man again. She crouched down beside his seat so she could look at him without intimidating him. Her voice stayed soft and warm. "Sir," she said gently, "the plane isn't moving anymore. The captain stopped it, just like you asked. You're safe. No one can hurt you here." He didn't look at her at first. His eyes moved across the cabin, tracking things that weren't there: shadows, shapes, perhaps memories. Then finally, he turned toward her. She could see the torment behind his eyes. "You don't understand," he whispered. "Someone put something on this plane. I know it. They said they would. They warned me." Lena kept her expression steady, even though she felt a pinch of sadness for him. "Who warned you?" she asked softly. He swallowed, his throat tightening. "I can't say. They listen. They always listen." The assistants exchanged a desperate look. The kind you give someone when you're watching a friend crumble and you don't know how to help them. One of them leaned closer to Alina and whispered, "He hasn't slept in days. He's been under so much pressure. He thinks someone is after him. But there's no danger. We've checked everything. He's having a really hard time." Alina nodded. She understood the importance of handling this with care. The last thing she wanted was to make him feel attacked or dismissed. Fear like his couldn't be fixed with simple words. It had layers, deep ones, and all she could do was try to keep the situation calm. Outside, the airport security team finally arrived at a safe distance. They spoke with the captain through the headset, getting updates and planning their next steps. The aircraft remained locked. The passengers inside had no idea how close the security team was. The captain's voice came over the intercom, warm and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are experiencing a situation that requires us to remain paused for a short time. Please stay seated with your seatbelts fastened. Our crew is here to assist you, and your safety is our priority." The announcement was calm, but it didn't erase the tension. People began shifting in their seats. A man in the aisle seat checked his watch repeatedly. A woman near the window whispered to her daughter to stay quiet. A few rows farther back, a teenager removed her headphones. Sensing the seriousness of the moment, Alina continued to move through the first-class cabin, making sure the man's fear didn't spill into panic that could spread to others. "Sir," she said again, keeping her tone gentle, "nothing is going to happen. You're surrounded by people who want to help you. You're not alone." For a moment, the man seemed to consider her words. His shoulders loosened slightly, and he took a slow breath. But just as quickly, something inside him shifted again. He sat upright and pointed tremblingly toward the overhead bin above him. "It's there," he said. "I heard it. I know it." Alina didn't open the bin immediately. She didn't want to reinforce the fear without reason. Instead, she slowly placed a hand on the edge of the bin, keeping her voice steady. "If it will help you feel safe," she said, "I can check. But I want you to know that we looked at everything before the flight. There is nothing dangerous here. I promise." His chest rose and fell quickly. "Check it," he whispered. "Please." She nodded and gently opened the compartment. It held a neatly packed briefcase, a small jacket, and a laptop bag, nothing more. She showed him slowly so he could see clearly. "Nothing here," she said softly. The man stared into the bin, his breathing still uneven. But there was a flicker of relief in his eyes, tiny, fragile, but present. But the fragile calm didn't last long. From outside the plane, the faint sound of an approaching engine echoed through the cabin walls. The man flinched like he had been struck, gripping his seat even tighter. "They're coming," he whispered. "I knew it." Alina shook her head gently. "It's the airport staff. They're here to help, not harm you." But he didn't seem convinced. He leaned forward, rushing out words in a panic. "No, no, no. You don't understand. They're going to take me. Please, don't let them in." Alina felt her heart tighten. She wanted nothing more than to ease his suffering. But she also knew she couldn't stop airport authorities from doing their job. Safety came first for him and everyone else. One of the assistants placed a hand on his shoulder again. "They just need to talk to you," he said, trying to steady his voice. "No one is going to hurt you. We'll be right here." The man shook his head slowly, a quiet desperation in his eyes. Outside, security officers moved into position. They approached the aircraft steps, communicating with the captain. The captain informed Alina through the intercom that they needed him to open the cabin door. Alina stood up, giving the man one last reassuring look. "I'll be right here," she said. "You're not alone." She walked toward the aircraft door and unlocked the mechanism. It swung open slowly, and a rush of outside air entered the cabin. The security team stood just outside, calm and professional. They spoke softly as they boarded the aircraft. "We're here to help," one of them said in a gentle tone, making sure the man didn't feel threatened. The man's eyes widened as he saw them. He shrank into his seat, pressing himself against the backrest. "Please," he whispered, "don't take me." Lena stepped closer and crouched beside him again. "They're here to make sure you're okay. That's all. They aren't here to hurt you." The officers moved slowly, deliberately, giving him space. One of them bent slightly, keeping his voice low and steady. "Sir, we just want to speak with you. We want to make sure you're safe." The man squeezed his eyes shut, his breath shaky and uneven. His assistants each took hold of one of his hands, grounding him. After a few quiet moments, he finally gave a small nod. The officers gently guided him up from his seat. He moved stiffly, like his legs barely wanted to carry him, but he didn't resist. The entire cabin watched silently, though no one dared to speak. As he walked down the aisle with the officers and his assistants beside him, the plane felt absolutely still. Passengers stared, hearts heavy with worry and curiosity. Some looked confused, others saddened, and a few simply shocked by how quickly a routine flight had turned into a moment none of them would forget. Before the man stepped off the plane, he turned slightly toward Alina. His eyes carried exhaustion, fear, and something that looked almost like apology. She gave him a soft nod, an unspoken message. "You're safe now." Then he stepped out onto the stairs, escorted gently by the officers. His figure grew smaller as he walked toward the waiting vehicles on the ground. The cabin remained silent long after he left. It felt like the entire plane had gone through the fear with him, even if only a fraction of what he felt. Alina closed the door carefully and took a slow breath. The captain came over the intercom again, thanking passengers for remaining calm. He explained there would be a short delay while the crew made sure everything was clear and safe as Alina walked back to the front of the cabin. She felt a swirl of emotions, relief that no one was physically harmed, sadness for the man whose mind had overwhelmed him, and gratitude that the situation had ended peacefully. She didn't know what the man was going through, but she knew one thing for certain. Fear like his wasn't something anyone chose. And sometimes, it took just one moment of panic to bring an entire world to a halt. The plane still hadn't left the ground, but the impact of that moment would stay with everyone on board for a very long time. 4. Several long moments after the man was escorted off the plane, the cabin remained silent. It felt like everyone was holding their breath at the same time, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The engines hummed quietly, but even that familiar sound seemed distant compared to the heavy pause that had taken over the aircraft. Alina stood near the front, her hands resting gently against the back of a seat, giving herself a moment to gather her thoughts. She had dealt with unexpected situations before, but something about this incident weighed on her differently. Maybe it was the fear in the man's eyes, or the helpless look on his assistants' faces, or the way the whole plane had shifted into stillness because of one person's pain. Whatever it was, she felt it deeply. The captain stepped out of the cockpit a few minutes later, his expression calm but serious. He walked straight to Alina. "Is everyone all right up here?" he asked quietly. Alina nodded. "Yes, the passengers are concerned, but they're calm. I think they're just waiting to understand what's going on." The captain sighed softly. "Security is doing their checks now. We're going to have a delay, but we'll take off once everything is cleared. Safety first, always." Alina appreciated his steady presence. He was the kind of captain who didn't panic, didn't rush, didn't make excuses. He handled things with patience and care, and that helped her feel grounded again. A soft ding rang through the cabin as the captain made another announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We've paused to allow airport authorities to assess a situation involving one of our passengers. We'll be departing once they complete their checks. We appreciate your understanding." His tone was warm, steady, and reassuring. It helped a little. The passengers eased into their seats again, though many still looked troubled. A woman in the second row raised her hand gently as Alina passed by. "Miss," she said quietly, "is everything safe? I mean, are we okay?" Alina gave her a gentle smile, the kind that came from the heart, not from training. "Yes, you're completely safe. We're just making sure everything is handled properly. The passenger who left is being taken care of, and there's nothing for anyone here to worry about." The woman nodded, relief softening her tense shoulders. Across the aisle, a man leaned forward. "Was someone sick?" he asked. Alina kept her calm tone. "He wasn't feeling well, so we needed to stop. The crew and airport staff are helping him now." It wasn't the whole story, but it wasn't a lie either. And it protected the passenger's dignity, which mattered greatly to her. Once she finished checking on the passengers, Alina walked toward the small galley at the front of the aircraft. Where two other attendants stood waiting, Leela looked shaken. She kept twisting her fingers together, her shoulders tight. "I've never seen anything like that," she whispered. "He looked so scared, like he was running from something we couldn't see." Another attendant, Tomas, exhaled deeply. "Poor guy. Imagine feeling so threatened that you can't even sit on a plane without panicking." Alina leaned against the counter gently. He wasn't being difficult. He was terrified. Sometimes people carry things we can't imagine, and sometimes it shows up at the worst moments. The three of them stood quietly for a moment before Thomas spoke again. "Security wants us to stay ready. They said they might do a full cabin check." Alina nodded. "If they do, we help them. Let's stay calm. The passengers will take their cues from us." Meanwhile, outside the aircraft, security officers moved around the plane, checking areas near the cargo hold and speaking with ground staff. From the windows, passengers could see flashes of reflective vests and the slow movement of airport trucks. It added to their curiosity, but no one caused trouble. Most people simply waited, hoping the situation would clear soon. Inside the terminal, the story was probably already spreading. Airport staff, security teams, and other travelers would be whispering about why a plane suddenly stopped in the middle of the taxiway. But inside the aircraft, the truth stayed contained. Alina knew that once the plane took off again, the world would return to normal for most people. But for the passenger who had been escorted off, normal might be a long way off. After about 20 minutes, an airport security officer stepped into the aircraft. He had a calm presence, the kind of demeanor that put people at ease, without him having to say much. He approached Alina and the captain. "We'll need to do a quick sweep inside," he said. "Just protocol." Lena nodded and opened the way for him. She announced to the passengers that a brief inspection was taking place, and that there was no danger. The officer walked through the cabin slowly, checking overhead bins and certain compartments. He didn't rush, but he didn't linger either. His movements were confident, suggesting he didn't expect to find anything alarming when he finished. He returned to the front and gave the captain a small nod. "All clear. We're good here." Lena felt her chest loosen with relief. The captain thanked him, and the officer stepped off the plane. A few minutes later, the door closed again, sealing the cabin back into its quiet, contained world. Passengers visibly relaxed. A soft murmur began to fill the air, people talking again, stretching, adjusting their bags. A child started laughing at a cartoon playing on her tablet. Someone opened a book they had set aside earlier. Life was settling again. But Alina couldn't shake the image of the man sitting in fear, clutching his seat like he was holding on to the last piece of safety in his world. She remembered how he had looked at her before leaving, exhausted, broken, apologetic. It wasn't just fear that had lived in his eyes. It was loneliness. The kind of loneliness that comes from carrying too much without asking for help. She wondered what his life looked like outside this plane. At first glance, he was someone people looked up to, a person with wealth, fame, influence, a name known across the world. But inside, he seemed like someone who hadn't rested in far too long. "Are you okay?" Tomas asked softly, pulling Alina from her thoughts. She nodded, though her heart still felt heavy. "I'm fine. Just thinking about him. You'll get help," Tomas reassured her. His assistants looked like they cared, and the officers were gentle with him. That's what matters. "I hope so," Alina said quietly, a few minutes later. "Damn." The captain returned to the cockpit, ready to resume preparations for takeoff. Alina and the other attendants did their final checks against seat belts, tray tables, luggage, safety equipment. It all felt familiar, grounding her back into routine. When the plane slowly began moving again, the passengers let out a collective breath. The engines grew louder, the wheels rolled smoothly over the taxiway, and the cabin settled into that familiar stillness right before takeoff as the aircraft reached its place on the runway. Alina stood in her usual spot for the safety demonstration. She delivered the instructions clearly and calmly, but deep down, part of her still replayed the earlier scene. Finally, the plane sped down the runway, lifting into the air. A gentle rise pulled the cabin upward, and soon they were soaring through the sky. The sunlight washed through the windows, brightening the cabin with a warm glow. Passengers looked relieved. Some closed their eyes to rest, some whispered to their travel partners, and a few simply gazed out at the clouds. Once the seatbelt sign turned off, Alina walked down the aisle again, making sure everyone was comfortable. People smiled at her, thanked her for staying calm, and complimented the way she handled the situation. Their kindness meant more to her than they realized. Near the middle of the plane, an older woman touched Elena's hand gently as she passed. "You did well, dear," she said softly. "Some people go through storms inside their minds. You helped them through his," Elena smiled, touched by the woman's words. "Thank you," she replied as she continued her walk. She realized something. Sometimes the hardest part of being in her job wasn't the long hours or the difficult passengers. It was seeing people at their most fragile and not always being able to fix their pain. Hours passed smoothly in the air. Passengers settled in, ate their meals, watched movies, and rested. The earlier tension faded away, replaced with the normal rhythm of flight. But the memory of what had happened stayed quietly present, like a faint shadow. Later, as Alina sat in the small crew area for a brief break, she found herself staring out at the endless sky. The clouds drifted far below, glowing softly in the sunlight. She wondered where the man was, now whether he was safe. Whether someone was helping him find clarity, whether he would get the rest he clearly needed. She hoped so, because even though the passengers on board would move on with their day, and the flight would land safely at its destination, she knew that fear like his didn't disappear easily. It stayed, hiding in corners, waiting to surface again when someone felt overwhelmed. And yet, she also believed something else. Sometimes a moment like this could be the wake-up call someone needed. A moment where everything stopped, not to harm them, but to show them that they needed help, rest, and care. As the plane continued toward its destination, Alina sat quietly, letting the hum of the engines fill the silence. The incident was over, but its meaning stayed with her. The plane had stopped that day because one person reached their breaking point, but perhaps, just perhaps, stopping was exactly what he needed. And sometimes, she realized, the world needed to pause for someone, not out of fear, but out of compassion. The rest of the flight carried on smoothly, almost surprisingly so. It was as if the sky itself knew the plane had already been through enough for one day, and now offered nothing but calm blue air and soft, drifting clouds. The quiet hum of the engine settled everyone into an easy, steady rhythm, and most passengers fell into their own thoughts, naps, or small conversations. But even with the calm around her, Alina couldn't fully relax. She moved through her duties with her usual warm professionalism. Yet a part of her mind kept circling back to the man who had been escorted off the plane earlier. His fear, his trembling hands, the strain in his voice, those details lingered in her thoughts like an echo as she walked down the aisle. She noticed that the passengers had eased into a more peaceful state. A young boy who had been restless earlier was now asleep on his mother's shoulder. A pair of friends near the window whispered and pointed at the clouds outside as if spotting shapes in them. An older man adjusted his glasses and quietly read his book. The incident at the beginning of the flight seemed far away now, almost like something that had happened on a different day. But Alina knew that everyone, in their own way, still remembered it. Moments like that didn't disappear quickly, they stayed under the surface, affecting people quietly. After checking passengers one more time, she returned to the small crew area. Tomas was there, leaning against the counter, sipping water slowly. "You holding up?" he asked. Alina smiled faintly. "Yeah. Just thinking about him." She nodded. Tomas let out a soft breath. "I get it. That was a lot. I've never seen someone break down that hard. It was frightening, but also kind of heartbreaking." "Exactly," Alina said. "He wasn't dangerous. He was overwhelmed. Completely overwhelmed. And exhausted," Tomas added. His assistants looked like they'd been trying to keep him stable for days. Alina rested her hands on the small counter, her fingers tracing the edge absent-mindedly. "I hope he gets help," she said quietly. "He needs rest, support, maybe even time away from everything." Tomas nodded. "People forget that pressure doesn't care if you're rich or important. You can have everything and still break inside." Alina gave him a thoughtful look. "You're right." They stood in silence for a moment, letting the calm hum of the aircraft fill the quiet space. A few hours later, when the sky turned a soft orange as the sun began to set behind the clouds, the captain made his final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for descent." "Thank you again for your patience today." Passengers settled into their seats. Some leaned back and closed their eyes. Others stretched a little and glanced out the window. The aircraft tilted gently as it began its slow, controlled drop toward the airport below. During the descent, Alina walked through the aisle one last time. A woman in the fourth row caught her hand as she passed. "You were amazing today," the woman said sincerely. "Thank you for staying calm." "I know it couldn't have been easy." Alina smiled warmly. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot." A man nearby nodded in agreement. "You handled everything better than most people could. We all felt safe because of how you and the crew acted." Her kindness touched her heart. She didn't help for praise, she helped because she cared. But hearing that it mattered made her feel lighter. Soon the plane touched down gently, wheels rolling along the runway with a soft rumble. A ripple of relief moved through the cabin. Passengers always relaxed a little more once they were on solid ground. When the plane slowly rolled toward the gate, Alina stood at the front, preparing to say goodbye to the passengers. The doors opened, and one by one they stepped off the aircraft. A few stopped to speak with her. "Thank you for everything today. You were so patient. You kept us calm." Comment with sincere gratitude. But her mind still drifted back to the man who had left earlier. She wondered where he was now, in a quiet airport office, a private medical room, sitting somewhere feeling embarrassed, or simply relieved that someone finally intervened. As the last passenger stepped off the plane, Alina felt a gentle exhaustion settle over her shoulders. She helped clean up the cabin with the rest of the crew, checking for lost items and straightening seats. Everything returned to order, as if nothing unusual had ever happened, but she knew the day had been far from ordinary. Once the cabin was empty, the captain walked over to her. "You did excellent work today," he said. "Truly, not everyone can stay calm in moments like that." Alina nodded. "Thank you. I just hope he's okay." The captain gave a thoughtful look. "I spoke with the airport team. They said he's in good hands. His assistants are with him, and they're guiding him to get medical evaluation and rest." He wasn't angry, just overwhelmed. Elena felt a soft breath leave her chest. "That's good," the captain continued. "Sometimes people who carry the weight of the world forget that they're human too. Today might have been the moment he finally lets someone help him." His words warmed Elena's heart. She hoped with all her might that he was right. Later, as she walked through the quiet terminal with her small crew bag rolling behind her, she felt a strange mix of emotions that often came after long. Eventful flight tiredness, reflection, and a sense of gratitude outside the large windows. Airport lights blinked softly across the runway. It was peaceful now. The chaos from earlier had faded into memory, but for Elena, the lesson stayed clear. One moment in someone's life can ripple outward, touching hundreds of others without warning. A person can look strong, successful, admired, and still be falling apart inside. And sometimes, the world needs to pause for them. Not because they're powerful, not because they're famous, but because they're human. As she walked toward the employee exit, she thought again of the man's tired eyes, the way he apologized without words as he left, the fear he couldn't hide. The way he carried alone, she hoped he would find rest. Real rest. She hoped he would find someone to speak with, someone who understood. She hoped he realized that asking for help wasn't weakness. It was survival. Elena stepped out into the cool night air, the breeze brushing her face gently. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the quiet around her. Today had been heavy, but it also reminded her why she loved her job, not for the travel, not for the routine, but for the people, for the moments when someone needed kindness, for the moments when a calm voice made all the difference. Because at the end of the day, every flight wasn't just about passengers getting from one city to another. It was about lives crossing paths for a brief time, sometimes in calm, sometimes in crisis, and sharing pieces of humanity along the way. Elena took a deep breath, opened her eyes, and started walking toward the parking area, ready to head home. Tomorrow would be another flight, another set of faces, another story waiting to unfold. But tonight, she carried with her the memory of a man who reminded her that even the strongest-looking people could break, and that showing compassion in those moments could change everything. And even though she would never know the full story of what happened to him after he left the plane, she hoped that somewhere in a quiet room far from the pressure of his world, he had finally closed his eyes and rested, truly rested. Because sometimes, pausing the whole world for one person wasn't a disruption. Sometimes it was exactly what needed to happen.